Hey everyone, and welcome. We're diving into a topic that's been on a lot of minds lately, I think,
Yeah.
judging by what you're sending our way, that U.S. national debt. And to really get into it, we're going straight to a source you sent us, investing legend, Ray Dalio's take. He's waving some pretty big red flags, but also, thankfully, offering advice on how to prepare for what's coming.
Yeah, Dalio, he definitely has a knack for seeing the bigger picture. And what he's saying here, right, is this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This national debt, it's so massive, it's impacting everything. We're talking inflation, which, I mean, come on, you feel that every time you go to the grocery store these days. And the value of the dollar itself.
Okay, so this is definitely something we should all be paying attention to. Dalio doesn't really mince words here, does he? He's saying we're way past the point of just cutting back a little. But how do you even do that at this scale?
He's saying we're at the point, actually, where paying back the debt, like completely, it's just not realistic. And that impacts how the U.S. economy, how it functions on a global level in a big, big way.
Wow. Okay, so what happens now? Does he offer any solutions in all this, or is it just like game over?
He definitely doesn't leave us hanging. Dalio, he lays out some really practical strategies for riding out the storm, let's say. But even more interesting than that, I think, is how he goes back and uses history to show that this has all happened before.
You know, now that you mention it, I've always found it fascinating how history does seem to repeat itself. So who does he use as an example here?
One of the most compelling parallels, I think, is when he talks about the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, they were the superpower back in the day, right? But massive spending, internal conflicts over resources, all that contributed to their decline. They even started debasing their own currency, and that's when things really went downhill.
So he's drawing a line between that and the U.S. today, saying we could be headed for a similar fate.
Well, it's not about saying that doom is inevitable or anything. It's more about understanding the patterns,
Yeah.
What brought down other empires, it can happen again. The U.S. isn't magically immune to it.
I see. And that's where those strategies you mentioned come in. Like he's saying, okay, these things have happened before, but that also means we've got a roadmap, a way to navigate the bumps in the road a little better this time around. So let's get into it, was the first thing he suggests.
His first strategy is something he calls stress testing your finances.
Stress test. Okay, that sounds a little intense, not going to lie. Are we talking like treadmill and heart monitor intense here?
No, thankfully nothing like that. It's really much less intimidating than it sounds. Just imagine asking yourself, if your income suddenly changed, could you cover, say, 3 months of essential expenses? And if not, well, what could you adjust?
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's about being prepared, having that buffer, right? So not just surviving, but maybe even coming out ahead, even in a rough economy. What else does he recommend?
His second strategy is practicing austerity.
Austerity. See, now that just sounds a bit severe, doesn't it? Like I'm only eating rice and beans from now on or something.
No, not quite that drastic. It's really just about being, more mindful, more intentional with how you spend, understanding what you really need versus what you want.
So maybe bringing lunch to work a few times a week instead of eating out.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll finally get around to that DIY project I've been putting off.
Exactly. Small changes even, they can make a big difference, both for your bank account and even, I think, your overall well-being,
I like that. It's about taking control, right, of your own money, your own situation, and not just relying on, a system that maybe won't always be there to catch you if you fall, which actually is a perfect segue because Dalio's third strategy really leans into that whole personal responsibility thing, but on a global scale, right?
Yeah, this is where his understanding of the bigger picture really comes in. He says, look, we're living through a major, historical shift, similar to what happened after World War II, he says, with China emerging as a major economic force.
Yeah, that's been hard to miss in the news lately, that's for sure.
Right, and it's easy to get caught up in the political side of it all. But Dalio, he encourages us to zoom out a little, look at the bigger picture. It's not about choosing sides. It's about recognizing how the balance of power globally is shifting. What does that mean for you, for your opportunities?
I like that. It's like he's saying, don't just read the headlines. Try to understand the currents that are actually shaping the world around you. This is all starting to feel very big picture. So how does he bring it back down to what we can actually control day to day?
That's where his fourth strategy comes in. He's a big believer in taking ownership of your own financial future. That means saving, investing wisely, planning for the long term. It's about being proactive, not just reacting to whatever happens.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Don't just wait for someone else to fix things for you, right? Take charge of your own destiny, which is a nice way to think about it, even if it is a little daunting too at times. All right, so what's the final piece of the puzzle here? What's that fifth strategy?
His fifth one focuses on investing in yourself, basically, specifically your education and your skills.
Okay, so like learning a new language, finally taking a course to level up my skills, or maybe just figuring out like what crypto actually is after all this time.
You got it. Think about it. The job market, it's always changing. Something that's in high demand today might be totally obsolete tomorrow. It's about being adaptable, a lifelong learner, that kind of thing.
Oh, so you're saying that our favorite podcast, this deep dive, is a smart investment then?
Well, precisely. But on a serious note, it's true, staying curious and informed, it's more valuable than ever these days.
This has been fascinating so far. We've covered a lot of ground. Dalio's painted a pretty stark picture, but I do appreciate that he's not just leaving us with this sense of doom. He's giving us a path forward too.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I want to circle back for a second to how Dalio uses history in all of this. We talked about the Roman Empire, the rise of China, but he also brings up a period that's a little closer to home for us, the Great Depression.
Good point.
And speaking of which, before we get into those lessons learned or not learned, I want to remind you that this whole deep dive is for you, based on what you sent our way. We're about to get into some really crucial takeaways from the Great Depression, so don't go anywhere.
So, with the Great Depression, right, one of the things that really stands out is how, like, ignoring warning signs, it can turn a bad situation into a complete disaster. In the 1920s, there was this feeling of, optimism, prosperity, but underneath it all, trouble was brewing.
It's like the calm before the storm, right? Everyone thinks everything's fine, maybe even great, but then, bam.
Exactly. And when that bubble burst, well, it exposed all the weaknesses that were already there. Unsustainable debt, relying too much on a single industry.
Those cracks in the foundation we were talking about, right? And it's amazing to see how those same patterns are playing out today. Dalio actually connects this to his advice about stress testing your finances. Remember that? Like he's saying, don't wait until there's a crisis to figure out where you're vulnerable.
That's such a good point. He's all about being proactive. Ask the tough questions now while things are, relatively stable. Like, it's much easier to adjust your sails when the seas are calm, right? As opposed to waiting until you're caught in a storm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So how does practicing austerity fit in all of this then? Is it about making sure you can weather the storm, so to speak?
Absolutely. It's about building like financial resilience. When you're careful with how you spend, you're not as reliant on debt, which means you're less vulnerable when those economic shocks hit, whether it's a recession, a job loss, or something totally out of left field.
It's like having that emergency fund, but for your entire financial life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it goes back to Dalio's whole thing about personal responsibility too, right? You're not waiting for someone else, the government, your job to bail you out. You're taking control of your own financial well-being.
Which is huge, especially considering those global shifts we were talking about earlier. If history tells us anything, it's that things can change drastically and fast, and not always in ways we can predict.
Exactly. He's not saying everyone needs to go out and become, experts in geopolitics, but it is a good idea to be aware of the bigger picture. Like we were talking about earlier, China's growing economic influence. That creates challenges, but it also creates opportunities.
Okay, so let's say I'm listening to this and thinking, this is all great, but what can I actually do to adapt to global shifts? What would you suggest?
Well, it could be something as straightforward as diversifying your investments, looking at international markets, or it could mean, being open to learning new skills that are in high demand globally.
Yeah.
It's all about staying informed, staying adaptable.
Makes sense. Don't just assume what worked in the past will always work, right? Be ready to evolve as the world does. It actually reminds me of what Dalio was saying about investing in yourself.
Right. In a world that's constantly changing, your ability to learn to adapt, that's your most valuable asset, bar none. Maybe it means taking a course, or learning a new language, or reading, or honestly, just staying curious about the world around you.
So it sounds like whether we're talking about navigating a tough economy, dealing with a changing world, or just building a life that's a little more resilient, it really all boils down to the same thing, taking ownership of our own journey and never stop learning.
I like that. Because that's really the core of Dalio's message, right? It's not just about money. It's about building a life that's, resilient, adaptable, and ultimately fulfilling.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a good reminder that even when we're facing these huge, complicated challenges, we've got more power than we realize sometimes.
Absolutely. We have the power to learn, to make informed choices, and to shape our own futures.
So true. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's just take a second to recap those 5 strategies because they're so important.
Good idea. We talked about stress testing your finances, practicing austerity, adapting to global shifts, taking personal responsibility, and of course, investing in yourself.
Each one is like a tool you can use, right, to help you find your way, especially in uncertain times. Now, going back to Dalio's love of history for a moment, he also uses World War II as an example to show how these big power shifts can actually play out in the real world. So what happened after the war in that case? So how does World War II fit in with this whole global power shift idea?
Well, think about it. Before the war, Great Britain, they were the dominant world power. But then the war, it really took a toll on their economy. The U.S., on the other hand, well, we were less directly impacted by the fighting, right? So we came out of it in a much stronger position. And that was a huge turning point in, like, the whole global power dynamic.
And Dalio's saying we're seeing a repeat of that now with China.
Yeah. He's saying these transitions, they're rarely smooth or, easy. They can create economic competition, obviously, geopolitical tensions even, conflict in some cases.
So it's about more than just economics, right? It's about all these different forces all interconnected and how one shift can have these ripple effects everywhere.
Exactly. Which takes us right back to what we were saying before about being adaptable. It's the name of the game. The more you can wrap your head around those changes and adapt to them, the more prepared you'll be for whatever happens next.
That's a great point. This has been a really insightful deep dive, I've got to say. Dalio definitely lays out some pretty stark challenges, but I appreciate that he doesn't just leave us there. He offers a way forward, too.
Absolutely. If there's one thing Dalio's big on, it's empowerment. He's saying, listen, there are some serious challenges ahead, but you have the power to get through them, to come out the other side.
It's like he's handing us a map and a compass.
Yeah.
He's saying, look, the terrain, it might be rough going in some places, but here are the tools you need to find your way. He's not going to carry us, but he's giving us the knowledge and the push to take those steps on our own.
That's such a great way to put it. And it really gets to his point about knowledge being power, right? The more you know about history, about the economy, about how the world works, the more informed your decisions are going to be.
I love that. So as we wrap up here, what's the one thing you hope people take away from all of this, from Dalio's insights?
I think the big takeaway, if I had to pick one, is this. We can't control everything that happens out there, but we can control how we react to it. We can choose to be proactive, to learn, to make choices that make us more resilient, more likely to succeed, no matter what the future throws our way.
Couldn't agree more. We can choose to be prepared, not panicked. And that is a powerful place to be. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us, everyone. We'll see you next time.